welcome to the Mindset Michelle TV show. We're so super excited for you to be joining us for yet another episode. And today we have somebody that I've met a few years ago, but I've watched his journey and his business's journey with great interest. And wow, what an amazing person, an amazing human being. So welcome to the show today, the lovely Russell Pearson. Hello, Russell.
Oh, thank you, Michelle. That was a lovely intro. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome, Russell. I remember when I first went, I saw Russell at the National Speakers, or Professional Speakers as it's called now, convention a few years ago, and I was blown away by him and Jane Anderson, who was speaking at the time, about their knowledge, their professionalism, and what they were doing in business. And like I said, over the last few years, I've seen him just growing and growing and stepping more and more into that thought leader space and sharing all of that. But obviously, Russell wasn't born as the amazing human being and business entrepreneur he is today. So please, can you explain to people, how did you come to be doing what you're doing, and what, kind of threads led to you being this entrepreneur today?
Yeah, sure. It's yeah, it started off as me falling, through a series of holes that ended up getting me here, very much like Alice. But I started in it's weird. When I was a kid, I was very much into art. My parents sent me to an art school just to develop that out, and got a sense of things. I think my father wanted me to be an art restorator, and I found out that that was all just about chemistry, and I wasn't interested in chemistry. But I was one of five boys, and fairly competitive. So I took that art background and actually applied it to a competitive space, which was advertising, and found myself working in an advertising agency that was doing a lot of work for all sorts of different organisations, but even big pharma organisations. And through that whole process, I fell in love with branding. I fell in love with the processes of marketing, and long story short, started my own agency, ran that for 15 years, developed that into a consultancy, and now I actually help consultants run their businesses. So we help consultants grow their practice.
Wow, and what an incredible background, all the way from fighting off. I don't normally hear, usually it's doctor, lawyer, or architect, but
Yeah.
art restoration's a new one.
Yeah, my father's an eclectic sort of individual. And unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, I find myself turning into him. It's one of those things that he was interested in, like art and poetry and different elements of how things work. And I'm finding that more these days, I'm probably more like him than I would like to admit, in that, I have hobbies and the like that are very much around discovering how things work. And that's how he came to the art restoration space. He was doing a little art himself and had a great teacher, and understood, I think it was really this sort of greatness piece, which was you would be able to retouch the master's work. I think that was sort of the concept behind it. And while that's a nice concept, the reality is much more mundane.
And I love that recognition that, yeah, that curiosity and that learning that evolved eventually as a hobby into, how things work, and understanding the hidden ideas behind it. I also love how you were sharing so beautifully that, you had your own agency and kind of evolved. I think for many people in the entrepreneur space, it is that evolution of who they are, and that communication and marketing aspect evolved for you.
Yeah.
If I was to ask you then, with this eclectic farmer and family background, and then moving through what's a very creative area in the advertising and branding space, what then would be your perception, or what would you define for yourself personally as success now?
Yeah, and that changed definitely. So when I was building the agency, the model of success was, the business that runs without me was my concept. But I've sort of asked myself questions, and things have happened in my life that made me question, well, why am I doing this? Am I happy doing this, and what have you? And I think that the definition now has very much changed to, the ability to do what you want when you want, right? So the ability to spend your life where you want to spend it, and you need to do some things to put yourself in a position of that, even if you start from a place of privilege. But I think that is the opportunity for each of us, is in this day and age, to have a full range of choice. Yeah, that's what I see as certainly my perception of success right now, but it might change.
And that's so true. It does change and evolve at different times. But I like how you've identified that it's not necessarily the building of the agency and then having that agency run without you. It reminds me very much of how people can sometimes be climbing that corporate ladder, and then they get to the top and realize, well, actually, my health is terrible and my kids don't know me, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
Once they get to the top.
And not only that, there's such a forward focus on things, and I was very much guilty of it, that you get to the top of some imaginary mountain and you just see the next mountain. And so there's this constant mountain climbing, and there's no real Everest because there's always another bigger mountain. So I think it's the opportunity to look back and actually see where you've come from and the successes along the way. And it's certainly some of the things that I speak to my clients about, is like identifying those wins. What are the things that you do even on a weekly basis that are moving you in the right direction?
And that's where it so beautifully segues into the suggestions and hints that you may have for people about how they can create that within their own lives. I like how in their evolution, as we've been talking about, from the climbing the next Everest and seeing the next mountain, to it's about that flexibility and having the opportunity to do, as you so eloquently put, what you want when you want it. And recognizing what a privileged position that is actually to be in as well.
Absolutely.
Not everybody has obviously those opportunities. So I'm interested then to create that kind of mindset, and to create that mindset where it takes it off of that goal or next mountain focus,
Yeah.
and onto what is it that makes me happy? What is it that makes me make full use of what opportunities are in front of me now? What sort of suggestions do you have for people so that they can start creating that kind of mindset?
Sure. Well, you got 2 points there. So there's one's making full use of the opportunities in front of you, and the other one that's what makes you happy. And sometimes those two things are in conflict, because one's about performance and utilization and what have you, and the other is more of a feeling or a state. And I think for the performance and utilization and making the most of things, I really believe it comes down to one word, which is ownership. And that the start of that just comes to your own thoughts. So having ownership of the things that you're thinking about and the ways that you're thinking, that anyone on this planet has those opportunities, unless they're around and they don't have their brain function, right? So as long as people have their brain function, and they're in a situation where at the very least they can have ownership of their thoughts. Thoughts can come in and they can decide whether to let them go out or hold on to them. And then moving out from there, it's the actions that you take, and having ownership of those actions, and then the decisions that you make. Because every little decision in our day adds up to the result. And then so once you have these opportunities in front of you, it's the ownership to decide, is this in alignment with what I'm trying to do? What is owning the fact that other people are moving parts out there, the environment's changing, people are changing, you're changing. And so in that constant flux, what can you have ownership over, and actually take responsibility for even the results of things, even though there are moving parts, because you can only control what you control. And it's kind of along the serenity prayer line, but you do have that ownership to control the things that you can control, even if it is just your own thoughts. So I think that's key in the performance side, at least. And I've got another point in a second, but what do you think of
Yeah, wow, wow. So much gold and I think we're going to, in this conversation, just be going from the top of each of those mountaintops and looking at the gold on each of them. Unpacking what you were sharing then about ownership of your thoughts and your actions and your decisions, I think that this is, really gold concepts to take awareness away of, in terms of the clarity that you can have ownership of the choices that you make around your thoughts, your actions and decisions, and that sometimes they may align with where you're going and where the world outside of you is going, and sometimes you might start down that pathway and it kind of conflicts or starts to rub against something that you might discover as a different value to what you thought your values were. But I love how you're focusing and looking at it in terms of ownership. So the ownership element that you're highlighting here is really quite valuable.
Oh, thank you. And it's interesting because the second part is the happiness piece. And I always ask myself this question. I'm not even sure who asked it to me. Someone must have asked it to me at some point in my life, and I gravitated to it. But it's, what would you do if you had everything you wanted? And that question is an interesting one, because when I ask people, they start to tell me what else they would want. And I said, no. Imagine you've got all that. You've got everything that you want. Everything is how it should be in the world. What would you do? And the answers that people come up with are usually very simple things. I would walk on the beach. I would sit on the beach. I would spend time with friends and family. I would have more dinners. I would with the people I love. I would talk to friends more. They're all these simple things, and the opportunity is in realizing that you can actually do those things now. Most of them are not things you need to achieve. They're things that you could do. So if the thing that you would do if you had everything you wanted was to do this simple thing, why not do it today?
And I've heard that fabulous concept explained in a different way, but the same kind of idea about activities versus the experience. So if you wanted the experience of travel, and many people say, I wish I could travel more, similar to your walking on the beach or having dinner, etc. If I had more time or I had more money, I'd do more traveling.
Mm.
But when you say to them, well, what's the experience that you get from doing more traveling? When they start to unpack and explain it, they can actually have those experiences without necessarily physically getting on a plane or a bus
Yep.
or going to another location. So I love how, as you're explaining it and coming back to, when you ask people, you have everything, you have all the money, all of everything you need to live, eat
Yep.
and breathe, etc. What would you do? And they come back to, well, I'd, go and sit down the beach and watch sunset or sunrise. I'd do
Yeah.
this, I'd do that.
And so I
It's
build
so
those in.
simple.
Like I purposely build them in. I recommend it to my clients, and we actually, take time in the diary and actually go, that's going to be time when I do those things that I would do. And sometimes it's read a fictional book. Sometimes it's go and play on one of my hobbies, and I've got a number of those. And sometimes it's as simple as just go to a state park somewhere and walk in nature. But you can do that. You can do it now.
And this is where I think, coming back to the ownership element of what you're saying, because for me, when I'm hearing you talk about ownership and then happiness, that owning that those simple things that don't cost money, they may take time, but you can own creating your own sense of happiness and the own kind of fuel for getting up and doing things by going for a walk to the park, going to the beach, going to here, going to there. And in
Yeah.
Australia, especially, we have such amazing weather most of the time that you can do many things that aren't necessarily weather dependent, like many other countries where you might not be able to go outside because it's snowing and you're snowed in or something like that.
Yeah, but there's usually more than one thing you want to do, and there's opportunities to build these in. Like The Artist's Way is a really great book if you're ever looking for something that talks in this space, and they talk about going on artist dates, like just having time for yourself where you go out and experience something new. It's kind of along that line, but there's probably a list of things that you would do if you had everything you wanted, and you can put them into your every week.
And you must do this because we talk a lot in our business about acting as if and visualizations and treasure maps, whatever label we put on it. But what you're describing and what you're suggesting sounds very similar to that acting as if, what if you had all the time in the world to do whatever you wanted to do? What
Yeah,
if you had everything you wanted? And I think that that's where starting with that belief and energy and motivation then can create that world for you as well.
yeah, and it's priorities. Like, uh, you know, my mother had 5 boys, and she was incredibly busy. She would work night shifts, and she would do all these things. And but there would be hours in the day when she could decide what she wanted to do. And had she gone, 2 weeks ahead in the calendar and actually put those things in, they would have been a priority because they would have been an appointment. And I think most people don't do that. The actual they go to try and make time, which is number one, impossible. But rather than make time, actually take time, go out further past all your appointments and start putting things into your diary in the future. And like I say to my clients, it's with the most important person in your small business, which is you, because without you, the business doesn't run.
That's so true, isn't it? And I love that. I years ago when I first started hearing about this stuff, it used to be about taking yourself out for a meeting, and doing your own kind of like, and especially in small business space, having your own performance review or
Yeah, right.
review review of your strategic plan or operations. So how did we do this week? Oh, well, 10 out of 10 for this, and 5 out of 10 for that, and what's coming up in next week that we need to kind of bring in more teams or whatever. But that whole, I'm joking about it, but it's actually very true about booking in that time with yourself
Yeah.
to actually make that a priority.
And most people don't make themselves a priority in that. And if I was to ask them, like say the number one client had an appointment at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday, if one of the other clients wanted to take that time, would they give it up? And most people answer no. And so if you realize that without you, the business doesn't run, then that is the most important person in the business. So when you make an appointment with you, you're making an appointment with your best client, and you shouldn't be giving that to anyone else.
Exactly. And I guess in a similar way, it also reminds me of, again, another great point that comes out from what you're talking about in terms of valuing you and your time in the same way that you would value your number one client.
Hmm.
Also valuing your time in terms of a dollar cost. So if you're constantly procrastinating or constantly sidetracked by something that's not necessarily adding to you or the business, then, even doing it on a weekly or a fortnightly basis of sitting down and looking at that time that you spent in those areas, putting a dollar value to it, and then going, well, okay, that, $4,000 over there, even if I spent 10 minutes of that time working on this other area, then it would actually create, $200,000 over here.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and there's even a flip side of that too. Is like, there's gurus out there telling you to spend 15 minutes a day, 5 days a week on your social media. But even if you valued yourself at $100 an hour, which is low for most business owners, it's thousands of dollars every year. Like, are there other people who could be doing that? There's people who can help you and people that can support you, and I think there's an opportunity there to understand that you've got to look after yourself to look after the business.
And I think that this is one of the interesting things when looking at whether people get like a coach or somebody to support them. I think that, valuing yourself and valuing what you do and then investing in yourself, like you're saying, is the most important asset in your business. Or if you're working for an organization, you working for that organization is the most important asset in getting that salary.
Mm.
So what do you need to do to invest to keep your most important asset healthy, happy, all of those things? And it can be, like you so beautifully were suggesting, making time in your diary where you actually take time for yourself. So you have
Yeah.
all the meetings and everything else, but you go, okay, this time on this day, I'm actually going to be taking for myself and doing X, Y, or Z.
Yeah, and one of the pieces on that ownership scale is that part of the ownership and responsibility is looking after you as that asset, which means that rather than trying to run some amazing race to get to the end to rest and crash, that you're responsible and have ownership for building in the energizing time throughout, not just before and after, but actually through. And whether you're working for someone else or whether you're working for yourself, that's the opportunity of really looking after yourself. How do you build in points of energy? And often it's that answer to the question I asked before: what would you do if you had everything you wanted, that re-energizes you? So if one of those things can be simple enough as going for a walk in the park, build it into your day.
I love that. And I think that for me also comes back to the fabulous point you were making around ownership. So taking ownership of re-energizing yourself. And I know that might sound like a little bit of a strange concept for people, but it's not necessarily up to other people in your business or your work colleagues or whatever to re-energize you and to keep
Mm.
you motivated. It's actually as you as the biggest asset in your business or in your office. Um, it's up to you to re-energize yourself, and whether that looks like going for a walk outside for some fresh air, or having a break, a coffee break where you go and talk to people for 10 minutes every few
Yep.
hours. Those sorts of things are very much the sorts of things to keep re-energizing and keep you moving.
Yeah, and it's to give you those opportunities for success, and those opportunities, those things of abundance that keep coming into your world. And you don't have to have them. You can choose not to be successful and not to have ownership and not to do any of those things. It's completely a choice. But if you are choosing to be successful, then looking after yourself is the first step.
So I love how we've been sharing these fabulous tips, and I also am quite aware that you talked about you worked in the advertising industry. So do you feel like you may have learnt some of this about looking after yourself from working in perhaps areas where you weren't?
Yeah, absolutely. Like and the other thing too is even just the balance side of things. So I've found myself in a hospital bed at some time. Everyone's got that version of that story. Just thinking about how did I get here and am I happy and all those questions. And really, what I realized is I put so much pressure on my mental self that I was like letting my physical self go. And I didn't even mean from an exercise point, but I mean a utilization point, like doing something with it. So I ended up like getting a hobby for myself, which was physical. And believe it or not, I'm a blacksmith, and I have been for the last 7 years. Where I've developed this skill that I do in my own backyard, at my own shed, and I learn these old skills, and from time to time get teachers to help me out, and it's this form of physical meditation where I've been thinking all day and doing strategy work that I can actually stretch my muscles and beat hot metal into submission and transform it into beautiful artworks.
Oh, fabulous. And so it's really quite funny. Your dad was right in the end
I
after
know.
all. You did end up what a beautiful arc. You ended up becoming a creative artist in the end.
Yeah, and so yeah, that's what I love about it too, is because I'm fairly practical. What blacksmithing gives me is this practical artwork. The things that you create have a purpose. Even if it's a simple bottle opener or something like that, you make your own tools, and I don't know, it's a really nice expression.
It sounds like it, and I know from my own experience, I do singing. So for
Right?
me, singing is this full body kind of immersive experience where, because you're so focused on your breathing, like you can't kind of hold a note without being focused on your breathing. It
Yes.
really naturally blocks out any other
Yeah, and
thoughts
so it's the
about
focus,
anything.
right? So the focus becomes this meditative point. So whether you're singing or whether you're trying not to burn yourself, yeah, there is this heavy focus. And if you can find something, if you've got a physical job that you do, find a mental focus. If you've got a very mental job, find a physical focus. But I think that focus is so key. You're spot on to enabling you to step away from the other roles in your life.
Yeah, and I love the many suggestions around ownership, priorities, treating yourself as an asset, booking in time with yourself that we've covered today, Russell. If people were wanting to reach out and get hold of you for maybe some marketing or branding advice or some advice about blacksmithing, any of the anything and everything in between, what's the best way to get hold of you?
Yeah, well, when people ask me what I make in the forge, I pretty much say I make mistakes. So I wouldn't be asking me any for too much advice in the blacksmithing space. But if you are looking for me, it's russellpearson.com. That's the easiest way to find me. Double S, double L, the way Russell should be spelled. And obviously, you can find me on social media, whether it's LinkedIn or Facebook. But I've also got a show on YouTube. So if you want to look me up there, easy to find.
Oh, beautiful. And if we were to ask you, or if I was to ask you, what advice might you give to your younger self? What would that advice be?
Yeah, I knew this question was coming, and it's a big one. Like you can order all the things that I could say, but I actually settled on it doesn't have to be hard work. And what I mean by that is, especially in my first 15 professional years, I worked really hard, right? And I prided myself on working hard. And then someone said to me, by working hard, you're making work hard. Uh, it scrambled me, and I realized that that's exactly what I was doing. I was priding myself on hard work, so I would make all work hard, and it doesn't have to be. It really doesn't have to be. So I can make work easy now, and it is. It's this really nice manifestation of thought.
What an absolutely fabulous way of putting it as well. And I think that it's so true because in those younger years where you're trying really hard to learn and to grow as a young adult and to understand your industry or whatever, um, it can be your own pressure that makes you work really hard and burn out
Yeah,
and all of the things.
you can
Uh,
make it really tough on yourself, and it's unnecessary. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love how you're sharing that's what advice you might give to your younger self, because I think that realization that it doesn't have to be as hard is something that can take a little bit of time for people to understand.
Mm. Bit of maturity, and maybe I'm in that place now.
Bit of maturity. Well, and I love how it went full circle and you came back to being an artist in a different form.
Absolutely, and it's funny too because I bring those same analogies of the work I do in the forge to my own business, and now I see it as like helping people take material without having to add anything, without having to subtract anything, actually just transforming the shape of it and heating it up and making it critical temperature so it can transform into something long and long lasting. Beautiful and long lasting too. So it's a metaphor for the business and life as well.
Wonderful. What a wonderfully beautiful concept that the alchemist, making something out of a piece of metal and forging some beauty in the world. So,
Mm.
and whether that's personal or business or whatever that might be, what an absolutely beautiful place to finish up today. So, thank you so much for coming on the show, Russell.
Thanks, Michelle.
It's been an absolute pleasure. And to everybody that has sent through all of the fabulous reviews and feedback that we get on the show, I know they would also be wanting to thank you, Russell, because of all these fabulous tips that wonderful guests like yourself have shared. But for now, from my heart to your heart, be great, be fabulous, and be you.